we're excited today because we have members of the band who will introduce themselves to you, who are going to be talking a little bit about the evolution of the blues in America, because it is such an indigenous American form, and it's one of those exciting things that Chicago was always such a huge part of. And as you know, later in the season we have Buddy Guy coming in, so it's kind of a blues-centric season for us. So we're very excited. So we'll get started in just a second. If anybody has any questions about the FPAC or about the show, or for any of the performers afterwards, I'm sure that we can stick around for a few minutes, and you all know how to get in touch with me. So give us just a second to finish setting up, and we'll get started.
Well, good afternoon, everybody.
How you doing?
Nice to see you all.
So I'm Elwood. This is Jake over here. The fabulous blues sisters over here, Precious and Ebony Taylor. We're
Hello.
Very, very glad to have them with us. Chicago natives, by the way.
Sound man.
Chicago natives. And related to the fabulous Coco Taylor. So we're really really excited that they're on the road with us, and they just do a fabulous job. And on the end, from the fabulous town of Fayetteville, Arkansas, Corey Hogleg Montgomery on guitar over here, and we're just pleased to have him with us too. He's a great talent and also an encyclopedic knowledge of blues history.
How many musicians here today?
Oh, right
All
on.
right.
All right.
Right on. We thought we would start with a little number that Coco made famous. Corey, can you pass me one of those mic stands just so I don't get a little volume control on this? Do you know the history of this tune, of this particular tune? I know it's a...
Well, it's a co-collaboration with Coco
yeah.
and Coco Taylor and it's not Holland Wolf. And anyway, it started as an instrumental. They were from Chess Records and Willie Dixon. Thank you very much.
Willie Dixon.
Thank you, the father of Chess Records and serious guitarist and musician. And they co-collaborated with this song, and it was one of her biggest songs and biggest hits. It was really, I believe, might have been even the first one that.
Yeah, I think it was her first
first biggest hit that she made.
Thing.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. All right, so with why don't we start off and do a noodle around, do a few.
So if you can give us a little soul clap, we're gonna put you in the. Even though this is the library. Yeah. Tell Automatic Slim to tell Razor Toting Jim to tell Butcher Knife Toting Annie to tell Fangs Talking Fanny we gon' pitch a bomb down to that Union Hall. We're gonna rump and trump till midnight. We're gonna fuss and fight till daylight. We're gonna pitch a wang dang doodle all night break it down, y'all. Soul clap. All night long. Need a little soul clap right there. That's it. All night long. All night long. Hey, hey, all night long. Oh, yeah. I said all night. We gonna all night long. All night long.
Precious and Ebony Taylor.
Thank you, guys.
Well, we were asked to speak a little bit about blues history, and I think one of the first things to mention is that just music in general is it's kind of a unique form of communication. It seems to cross all sorts of boundaries, political, racial, whatever your particular thing is. Everybody can get together and language. Everybody can
language.
get absolutely. When you're all in one room, doesn't matter where you're from. If you're singing something with soul, and people don't need to necessarily know the meaning, but we all come together at that point because music has emotion written into it. It has feeling in the melody and in the chord structure. And in the case of blues, I think what's interesting is that really the roots are plantation songs, and even prior to the history of American slavery, a lot of those slaves were really from Western Africa, with a rich history of vocal history, and the call and answer thing is very much a trait of tribes like the Wolof tribe and the Mandingo tribe, Malenques. These were great civilizations prior to slavery, and in the 1300s, there was quite an extensive trading going on between the Portuguese and the Spanish, Mediterranean, and West Africa, as vessels became a little more seaworthy. They did travel up and down the coast of West Africa, and I guess at some point somebody had the crazy idea that not only will we trade in goods from these people, but let's trade in people. Now that's pretty whacked, I got to say, but that's the way it was nonetheless. And these vocal traditions wound up in the South in the 1700s. In the late 1700s, I think there was probably 5 million people living down south of the Mason-Dixon line, and a good 4 million of those were slaves. So slaves outnumbered the owners by 4 to 1. And these vocal traditions were a way of coping with their situation and with the life that they now had to lead. And I think actually one interesting point was in the late 1700s there was a huge revolt which almost got out of hand, and I think that was due to drumming. And the messages were drummed from one plantation to another and sort of spread through, and it was the language, and of course that language has its roots deep in African history as well. They outlawed drumming after that, so you weren't allowed to drum. So it really became very much a vocal tradition, and the messages and the news really spread through vocal traditions from one plantation to another, and then along the routes of the transportation routes up and down the Mississippi River, along wagon train routes, and then of course later on around along train routes. Prior to the Civil War, there's not a lot of documented history about blues music, but certainly it had been around for a long time and had been evolving for a long time. And I think, the Mississippi is known as the River of Song. Interesting also to note that as technology advanced, so did the music. It depended also on what kind of instrument you had. People who played pianos, people who rich families had pianos. A lot of the things that filtered into the elements that filtered into blues music was the kind of staid Western chord structures. When you lay that out on a keyboard, it's quite different than the way it's laid out on a guitar. So I think that one of the first great popular musics was ragtime. And in order to play ragtime, you had to have a piano. If you didn't, you had a guitar, and you really had a different kind of music. So the blues evolved with the instruments as well. As we moved into the 20th century, of course, electric blues followed with electric instruments, and particularly in Chicago here.
B.B.
Yes.
King was the first, one of the first to use an electric guitar as far as the slide.
Yeah.
And to go with what you're saying, as the slaves migrated north, so they took the music and the song with them, and to places, cities like Chicago and Detroit, and it took on a different form, and jazz, more or less, was kind of formed where B.B. King combined jazz with blues, and it was a whole new style of blues. So hence there are several different styles of blues music because of the migration and to the north after the slavery was abolished.
And then you've got
Things
Texas blues, which followed along the rail lines, and I think a new group of entrepreneurs, if you will, sprung up, the bluesmen. Who would travel along these rail lines to various different logging camps. They'd stop and they'd play a set, entertain the folks there, get on the train, and move on to the next camp. And it really created a bit of an industry. These were cowboys of
Boxcar musicians.
Yeah, yeah, and very much that's the tradition, certainly of Robert Johnson in the early days. The first documented, or shall we say charted, example of blues music was W.C. Handy in 1912, actually charting out music. He started as a ragtime player, but was a bit of a prodigy in his own right. And so, it's been 100 years since the first charted version of what blues is, the 1-4-5 progression. And I think it's still very much a force in music today. I think you could draw similar lines between blues music and rap music. It's really street stories, or in those cases, work chain gang stories, work stories. So several people that were quite influential. Robert Johnson. I know, Corey, you had mentioned some other people that influenced you as well.
Yeah, I grew up in East Arkansas, which is the heart of the Mississippi Delta, or not the heart, but the outskirts. And my dad was really into blues music, so I grew up hearing all these stories about all the old-time blues guys, guys you don't really hear about, but they're in the foundation of all musics, like Son House and Robert Johnson, who spawned into Robert Lockwood. But these guys, it was so fresh at that time. They were just sitting in a quarter playing jukes and making their living just playing music from town to town. And then finally, a man named Alan Lomax went down into the Delta and started doing what they call porch recordings, where he'd pull out his recordings out of the trunk of his car and start recording these artists. And until that time, no one had heard anything that was coming out of the South other than people that lived there. And that always stuck with me. I thought it was amazing. Because after that movement, then, people started hearing what was happening in the Delta, and it started the movement up the Mississippi and Memphis and Chicago, and then formed into all these different types of blues, which is pretty...
Right, and all the way up the Mississippi, there's those key towns in St. Louis, great blues town, Memphis, all the way up to Chicago. Really, all those spots were hot spots, and really still are today.
Yeah. It's pretty amazing.
Mm-hmm. And then, of course, there was women in the blues. I mean, it was really a man's occupation for a long time. I think really until the 19th century.
You got any cool Coco stories?
Yeah, there are quite a few women in the blues that stand out in my mind that influenced me. There's Ma Rainey, Bessie Smith, Etta James,
Yeah.
and then Coco, who is our aunt, who was I guess named the Queen of the Blues, and just watching her and being able to be mentored by her, we learned quite a bit about the blues and the lifestyle of a blues musician or blues entertainer and artist. And growing up and working along with her, able to work with her, was a highlight. I don't know if most of you all know that, but she's not here anymore. She recently passed in 2008, but we miss her a lot. But her music is still alive, and we're hoping that music can continue, that the history of all types of music can continue in the schools and programs like this, and just music history in general. Whether it's her or it's instrumental, we have to do all we can to keep continuing. So we thank you for having us here today to continue to keep live music alive. But anyway, she had a big influence on us. And
Where was Coco from originally?
Greenville, Mississippi.
Right.
So she's from Mississippi.
Were they sharecroppers? Is that where the family
Yeah,
was
they
from?
were sharecroppers, and her and Pop, who was her husband, who was passed, he played guitar and slide guitar, and a lot of people don't know she played guitar as well. She didn't do it often or every now and then, but she wrote a lot of songs herself, and she was an avid writer.
Oh, she was actually on Chess Workers with Willie Dixon. I know a lot of people seen the movie Cadillac Records, and she wasn't mentioned in the movie, but she was right there along in that time because Willie Dixon did write a lot of stuff for her as well, and she did a lot of songs with Little Walter, Muddy Waters.
Mm.
And she was still a powerhouse, just strong at 80-something years old. She'd get on stage and she could out-sing me or outlast me any night. I'd be tired and she'd still be shaking it up. And she
wear the flashiest, shiniest outfits that you've ever seen. I think that's where I get that from. Yes.
So there are quite a few modern-day blues women. We have Bonnie Raitt and Shamika Copeland.
Yeah,
and,
Shamika's great.
different people like that. Nellie Tiger Travis in Chicago.
Yeah,
different people
she's
like
great
that. And
too.
different other women in other cities, too, that are keeping, in other countries that are keeping the blues alive.
So women's lib was happening in the black community just 50 years before it sort of became a thing to do. It was already happening there. That's kind of interesting. Do we have any questions at all that anybody would like to ask?
Yeah.
Well, what time is it now? Let's see. We've been doing this for 15 years.
Yes.
Oh, yeah? Nice to see you again.
Yeah.
How you been? Yeah. We started off in doing a legend show in Las Vegas back in the late 90s. But in those shows, you only do 15 minutes. And if you go over, you get fined.
And it's more spruced up. It's not real. We definitely took the route of bringing it real.
Trying to make it real, yeah.
Yeah, the legend show's got all the dancers and the glitz and everything, and we kind of wanted to get to the real. The music is why we're here, and Jake and Elwood were a great tool to spread that. As a matter of fact, it was really funny because it must be about 10 years now. We did the Chicago show.
Yes.
The Blues Brothers Revival was like a play show in Chicago. That's where we met our sisters here then. And Coco actually came out, and a lot of different people came out.
Lonnie Brooks.
Some of the band
Steve
guys.
Cropper.
Steve Cropper. They all came out, and it was interesting though. Is they thanked us because back in 1980 when the movie came out, all of these musicians that were in the movie were available because they had no career. And the movie, they just did it. They didn't know it was going to be successful. It's just, who knows? But they were all available and did the movie. And once the movie went, they were so grateful that it took off. It added and created more life to their careers and enhanced. So they thought they were giving back to us. It was kind of funny. It was like, no, you don't owe us a thing. We owe you. But it was interesting.
They all showed up at the. They all came to the theater to see.
Yes, they all came and with support.
And I think the characters of Jake and Elwood is really a homage to blues music in general, and blues and rhythm and blues music, and that was the main thrust. That the characters were sort of written around. It was music first, and how would that play out with that spirit born into two orphans from the South Side, and that's really the root note of those characters. The humor and the sociopathic behavior then just follows, but that's where it came from. And the whole movie is a homage to all those great musicians. And of course, it came out at the height of disco music, which is a very where you count beats per minute, and very stale, with all the soul ironed out of it that music had. But it started out well enough with funk and soul music. It just morphed into a corporate kind of venture. So it was a very timely. It was very timely when the movie came out, and it really did bring back all that great music from the 40s up to the 60s.
I think we had a question back here. Well, a lot of groups from London came over. You have the Rolling Stones, you have the Beatles, took blues music and made it popular to the rest of the world, where it was only popular in the South or to poor people or to black people, because that was our survival method. That's how we coped with what was going on during the time.
But all those entertainers from England and whatnot saw the value and felt it. I mean, Led Zeppelin, what they came to Chicago, and did this big, huge show in front of, I don't know how many thousands of people. And at the end of the show, they would go to some little bar where Otis Clay was playing and sit down, and they would be like so into it back then. That's where they got their
same with
inertia.
Elvis and
Yeah.
people like Mick Jagger with the Rolling Stones. The same thing,
Yeah, as it sort of translated, it went across the Atlantic and came back went across the Atlantic in merchant ships and came back as top 10 charting acts and songs. I think also the Rolling Stones were very instrumental in particularly with Howling Wolf and B.B. King, and their first or second tour here. I'm not sure which one it was. They had B.B. King opening for them, and I think that really boosted the careers of really shone a light on these blues guys, who I think B.B. King was probably 40 at that time, and here he is out, opening up for the Stones. But that gave blues another more modern boost in popularity. Europe has always been great for recognizing this great American music and all these great American talented musicians.
Right. Which birthed, of course, rock and roll from blues. Any other questions?
Come on, another question.
For all the musicians who raised their hands again that were musicians. I saw more than two. Don't be shy now.
Oh yeah. They has anybody been to Stax? Did you go? Anyone else? It's amazing there, isn't it? Yeah, that was actually the first getting blacks and whites together in a room and making music that went around the world. And in spite of all the nonsense going on, whenever they were in that room, great came out of it. They didn't realize they had all these hits. They just went to the studio every day because it was something they did. It was just who they were, and they would go and they would sit and they would play. And someone like Otis Redding would walk in, and who's this young fella? Let's hear you sing, and things would just go. And then before you know it, they go to Europe and they're getting swamped like the Beatles. When they go over there and go, what's going on here? A lot of great stuff came out of Stax. And then, of course, the counterpart was Motown in Detroit, which a lot of great stuff came out of there, too. What would you like to know about Stax? Well, actually,
Paul Schaefer was
Paul
pretty-
Schaefer. Yeah. Paul was the guy who put the band together. He phoned Steve and Duck, and he put the whole band together, and that was why. And of course, they had that relationship. So actually, it was Paul Schaefer, and he was the original first blues brother. And if you read his book, has anyone read Paul's book? In his book, he explains that he was kind of in love with Gilda Radner at the time, and John, and he was the musical director for the Blues Brothers, and this is before the movie came out. So when he was in love with Gilda, she wanted to do this show. At the same time, they were planning to do this movie, and when John said, "Hey, we have a movie to do," he said, I'm doing this thing with Gilda, and John got mad at him and said, that's it. So he never ended up in the movie because he ended up doing this show with Gilda instead. But they all made up before John left and carried on.
But really, they had the whole Stax Volt rhythm section. And, what an incredible band. Plus Matt Guitar Murphy, of course, who in and of himself is just a great, great musician. So they really had the pick of the crop.
And actually, we did a show here, is it a year ago now?
Yeah, in Joliet. Yeah.
Did anyone go to that at all? No? We did this show, and it was, we had special guests. Paul was on the show, Blue Lou Marini,
Bones Malone,
Matt Guitar Murphy.
And Otis Day.
And that show was recorded, so we will be having a CD coming out soon, in the next, I think a month or so.
It was a show in honor of John's 30 years of John Belushi passing away. So everybody sort of came together. It was an evening of family and friends, and just a great joy to play with some of those incredibly talented people.
It was awesome to be with most of the original cast from the movie. It was an honor.
And Matt, sort of recovering from a stroke, has not really played a lot, but he's still got plenty of chops, and he's still alive and kicking. So that's great to hear.
I remember showing up that day, and Matt was sitting there with his guitar on, and he had people around him. They were talking to him, and he was just noodling and playing, and it was just like, listen to this man go. He doesn't stop. He just keeps playing and playing. It's wonderful. Wonderful talent.
Any more questions?
How many people come to the show tonight? That's it? 2 people?
How many people are coming to the show tonight?
Are there any other people that would like to
just
come
put
to
your
the
hand
show
up
tonight?
anyway. It just makes us feel
Who wants
good.
to come
That's
to the
all right.
show
Who
tonight?
wants to come tonight? Okay.
We're sold out, but there are always individual, like single tickets. We don't have seats together, but we have scattered single seats for anybody who wants to show up.
Well, that's wonderful to hear.
Because our show really does revolve around the history of music.
Yeah, very much so. I mean, Paul Schaefer was very adamant that we try to be, and Judy Belushi and Dan as well. It's about respecting the music and the way that these grooves were put together and trying to stay true to the original grooves. And Paul, by his own admission, has asked us to slow a lot of stuff down because apparently when they did record some of those live recordings, they were pretty jacked up, and now they're all on the natch. So they said, you know, we were doing this too fast. We got to slow it down, and that was good advice too.
Yes. Well, it was an idea John and Dan put together, I think, when they were in Toronto.
Yeah, I think the first night they met, they had this concept. Who's the? He used to be the MD at Saturday Night Live. Shore, can't remember his first name. Now he's a huge writer for film scores. He scored all of the Lord of the Rings stuff and many, many more. They had an album. Dan Aykroyd had picked up an album of John Lee Hooker, and he said, "See, this is the look we got to have." And is it Paul Shore? No, I can't remember his first name.
Pauly Shore.
Isn't he a comedian? Pauly Shore. He's also a great musician, a comedian and a great musician. There you go, right there. And he said, "Well, if you do this, you got to call yourselves the Blues Brothers." And that's sort of that was the genesis right there. And because they had come up with this concept before either of them were with Saturday Night Live, they owned the rights, and so SNL does not have any rights, as they do with all of the other characters which are conceived on the show. So that gave Dan and John freedom to go and do whatever they wanted with those characters, which may not have happened otherwise. So I think that's a great thing as well.
Got a question back here.
We auditioned. Yes, thousands.
We had already been working we'd been working as a team in Las Vegas, and we had done a documentary for A&E about two guys working in Vegas. It was a little peek behind the curtain of the show business of Las Vegas, and it was just really about that city and mob connections and music history. So it was seen through the eyes of two guys doing Jake and Elwood, which was kind of a different twist to it. And Judy had seen this documentary, and about a year later they were casting a show here in Chicago, and they'd gone through a number of Blues Brothers teams, and they hadn't found anybody they liked. So they said, "Oh, what about those two guys that did that documentary?" They gave us a call. We were in Toronto at the time, so we got in the car and drove 500 miles straight here.
Just like the movie. It really was.
Tired, coffee breath, trying to memorize a script on the way. And we got it. We came into the audition, 9 o'clock in the morning, and they pan-fried us, I think, for a good 3 hours. And then they said, "All right, well, thanks a lot." And then we got our bags and headed out the door. And they said, "Whoa, where are you going?" We said, "Well, man, we can't afford to stay in this town. We gotta head south." And they said, "No, wait a minute. We like you guys. You even smell like the Blues Brothers." I think that's what really clinched it, probably right there. It's,
that road stench.
Yeah.
Well, the other thing I would say is that Wayne bears a striking resemblance to John, quite a bit. Quite a bit.
So yeah, that was
So that helps.
That was the story of our adventure, but we're really greatly honored to be able to do this.
Absolutely.
They're just fabulous characters. And of course, the music just really sets the tone, and music and humor go very well together, and that's really what it's about. It's about doing a good job musically, and adding that humor, and trying not to be too serious with it. And I think those things are a great combination.
Any other questions?
Yes, sir. We absolutely could. Yeah. What do you have in mind? We could do a little refrain or whatever you'd like to do. Precious?
Okay, we could do I'm a Woman in D. Okay. Just do a little piece of it.
Right.
Sure,
It's
we
just
can
the
do it.
same as Mannish Boy.
Yeah, Managed for I'm a Man in D. A little bit. Did you agree? Okay, you kind of like
When I was a little girl, about 12 years old, I couldn't do nothing to save my doggone soul. My mama told me from the day I was born, she said, sing the blues, child, and sing it all night long. I'm a woman, oh yeah. I'm a woman, I'm a ball of fire. I'm a woman, I can make love to a crocodile. I'm a woman, I can sing the blues, child.
Put your hands together.
Put your hands together, yeah, yeah. I spelled W. I said O. M-A-N. I said W. Oh, I said M-A-N. Well, I'm a woman, yeah, I'm a woman, yeah, I'm a woman, make love to a crocodile. I'm a woman, make the devil crawl in the sand, yeah.
That first verse again, it sounds so good.
When I was a little girl, about 12 years old, I couldn't do nothing to save my doggone soul. Mama told me from the day I was born, she said, sing the blues, child. Yeah, sing it all night long. I'm a woman. Oh yeah, I'm a woman. I'm a ball of fire, yes I am. I'm a woman. I can make love to a crocodile. I'm a woman, and I can sing the blues, yeah, sing the blues. Oh yeah, oh yeah. Oh yeah, I'm a woman, a woman, a woman, a woman. Now walking, now talking, now singing blues, yeah. In the morning, don't you know, ain't nothing new, yeah. Oh yeah, I'm gonna give the harmonica a little bit. Can you blow? I want you to talk to me a little bit. Oh, make it,
Yeah, I'd like to thank you all for coming out. For those of you coming to the show tonight, hope you have a great time and enjoy it. And may the blues be with you.
Thank you.
By the way, a little side note here. Ebony went to this school.
Thank you so much. We'll
Thank
see
you
you at the
kindly.
show.
Thank you.
They really fixed
Thank
it up
you.
around here.
Hello. There we go. Thanks, everybody, for coming. For those of you who would like to see the show tonight, like I said, even though it's technically sold out, I always have extras tickets, especially those single seats. So, just stop by the box office, and I'll be there. So cool. And we certainly couldn't let it pass by without knowing that one of our wonderful performers that came to Moraine Valley. So we are sending them out there into the world, doing great stuff. So thank you so much.